I have mopped the same stretch of corridor for 11 years, 140 paces from the linen closet to the far window, and then back again. I know every seam in the floor plating, every place where the grout has gone gray, every hinge on the supply hatches that squeaks in the cold season when the heat exchangers cycle down, and the whole building tightens like a fist. The hospice sits at the edge of the Verath Sovereignty's spaceport transit district, far enough from the palace to be invisible and close enough that the supply ships can reach it in 20 minutes. It is not a glamorous posting. It was never meant to be. It is a place where beings come to wait out the final days of a journey, and where a staff of 7 keeps those days as quiet and as clean as possible. I am one of the 7. My name is Verath Sovereignty. I am 58 years old, I have gray in my hair, and I have a bad left knee that twinges when the pressure changes. I mop floors, I change linens. I sit with patients in the night when the loneliness becomes larger than the pain, and I sing sometimes when singing seems like the right thing. That is the whole of it. That is what I do. I did not always mop floors. 12 years ago, I was a field medic with the Frontier Relief Corps, out in the rough margin territories where the sovereignty's governance was more of a rumor than a fact. We worked in tents and in the shells of broken-down outpost buildings, with equipment that had been repaired so many times the original parts were a minority. We stopped bleeding and we set bones and we talked people through shock, and we did what we could with what we had, which was rarely enough. I was good at it. I was not brilliant. I had no gift for the elegant procedures, the delicate reconstructions, the techniques that the academy-trained physicians practiced in their palace clinics, with their calibrated light chambers and their centuries of Verath-specific pharmacology. But I knew how to keep a body stable through a long night, and I knew how to sit with a person in the hours when the body is doing its private work and all the medicine has been given and the only thing left to offer is presence. That turns out to be a more useful skill than most of the ones I studied. The courses don't teach it. They don't know how. I worked with heir medics, with sovereignty auxiliaries, with a handful of other humans who had found their way to the core through routes similar to mine, not glamorous, not well-paying, not the kind of work you explain at social gatherings. We covered territory that no one else was covering, and we did it without enough of anything. And most of the time it was enough. Most of the time is all you can ask. I left the Corps 12 years ago. The specifics are not a story I tell often. There was an incident in the heir campaign, a field decision made under conditions that I would make the same way again even knowing what I know now, and the review board saw it differently. I was not stripped of my credentials. They were careful about that. Careful in the way that people are careful when they want to avoid an argument more than they want to find the truth. But the path forward in the Corps closed. There were other options on paper, but the other options involved explaining the heir decision to a series of administrators who had not been there, and had very firm opinions about what the protocols required, and I did not have the patience left in me for that. I had spent 17 years in the field developing a very specific tolerance for hardship, and a very specific intolerance for certain kinds of institutional dishonesty. And those two things together make a person poorly suited for appeals processes. I came to the Verath Transit District because there was a hospice that needed night staff and asked no questions, and I stayed because the work turned out to suit me better than I had expected, and because after enough years, a place becomes yours whether you meant it to or not. The transit hospice is mine. The corridor and the linen closet and the dispensary shelf and the long window at the end with the spaceport lights. 11 years of mopping and the floor has learned my weight, and I have learned its grain, and that is a kind of understanding that I do not take lightly, having come by it slowly. The hospice does not get many sovereignty court patients. We are not set up for them. We have 12 rooms, a small dispensary, 1 examination suite, and a common area that serves as both waiting room and the place where the ambulatory patients sit in the evenings and watch the spaceport lights through the long window. Our clientele is transient workers, couriers, low-passage travelers passing through the port district, and the occasional long-haul crew member who has come down sick between legs. The Sovereignty Court patients go to the Palace Infirmary complex in the inner districts, where the floors are pale marble and the ceiling panels are calibrated to simulate natural light at the optimal spectrum for Verath immune function, and the physicians have titles that run to 4 words each. It is a different world. The administrator there, I have been told, has never held a mop. I do not say this as a criticism. I say it as a fact that describes the distance between that world and mine. So when the first royal physician appeared in our entryway on a cold 7th-month morning, I noticed. He was a tall Verath male, pale silver-white of skin and very straight in the spine, wearing the formal house healer robes in blue-gray silk with the Sovereignty emblem embroidered at the collar. He had the look of a man who had not slept, which on a Verath reads as a particular tightening around the eyes, the pupil color going from deep violet to something lighter and more brittle, as if the pigment requires rest to maintain its depth. He spoke to Administrator Jens at the front desk, and I was 3 rooms away with a mop and a bucket. But the hospice is not a large building and the walls are not thick, and I heard the word that matters in a medical facility: fever. I went back to the corridor. It was none of my business. By midday there were 3 of them, then 5. They took our private ward, the 2-room suite at the end of the east corridor that we reserve for patients who need quiet and separation, and they filled it with equipment I had not seen outside of medical supply catalogs. Instruments that must have cost more than the hospice's annual operating budget, stacked on cases and arranged on portable stands, and connected to a central monitoring unit that hummed at a frequency that made the hair on my arm stand up. The monitoring unit alone was the size of my linen closet. They sent our regular patients in that ward to the common room, and Jens came to find me with a look on her face that I had only seen twice before, both times when something had gone badly wrong. "It is the heir designate," she said very quietly. I stopped folding the sheet I was folding. "She was taken ill 4 days ago," Jens said. "They tried everything in the palace infirmary. The fever won't break. They've been rotating through the court physicians, 6 of them so far. The Sovereign King brought her here this morning, privately. He didn't want the news getting out until they had a handle on it." I was quiet for a moment. "Why here?" I said. "Why not another palace facility?" Jens looked at the floor, then back at me. "Because one of the physicians, the old one, Physician Verath, said sometimes a change of environment helps. Something about the palace air cycling and immune resonance. Something about the circulatory light settings in the infirmary not being right for a child her age. I don't know the specifics. I'm not a physician." She paused. "The Sovereign King is here too. He's in the examination suite. He hasn't left the building since they arrived this morning." I finished folding the sheet. I put it on the stack. "What do you need from me?" I said. "Same as always," she said. "Quiet, clean, and whatever they ask for from supplies. And if they ask you to leave the East Wing alone, leave it alone." "Of course," I said. I went back to the corridor. For 2 days I kept to my routine and gave the East Wing its space. I mopped the front corridor and the common area and the supply rooms. I changed linens in the 8 rooms that still had regular patients. I sat up through the first night in the common area with an old transit worker named Desser who had a progressive organ condition and who liked, in the nights when the discomfort was bad, to have someone play the bone game with him and not talk much. Desser was a Heron male, long-bodied and copper-skinned with the ridge markings of the Heron coastal clans down his forearms and the backs of his hands. He had been a river freight captain for 40 years, running cargo on the Great Delta systems before the trade routes shifted and the big automated haulers came through and made the freelance captain trade what it has been for the last 20 years, a way of life for the stubborn and the diminishing. He had come to the Verath Transit District to visit a nephew, and he had not gone home. I had never asked him directly whether the not going home was a choice or a condition, and he had never told me, and that was fine. He was a good patient and a decent bone game player, and he told his stories the way good captains navigate, knowing when to pause, knowing where the channels are, never hurrying. I liked Desser. I had sat with him many nights. In those 2 days I saw the court physicians come and go from the East Wing in their silk robes, and I heard, through the walls, through the half-open door of the dispensary when I was restocking, the instruments and their readings, and the low, careful voices of physicians who were being very precise because they were frightened. I heard words I recognized from my core days. Persistent systemic hyperthermia, unresponsive to standard protocol, secondary cascade indicators, elevated resonance in the lymph nodes. I also heard words I did not recognize, Verath medical terminology that goes back centuries and carries in it the architecture of a biology I studied in cross-species emergency procedure, but never deeply. There is a vast difference between knowing enough to keep a Verath patient stable through a trauma bleed and understanding the inner workings of Verath pediatric immunology. I am on the near side of that gap, firmly. What I understood was this: the child was not improving. The court physicians were rotating through their standard approaches, and the fever was not breaking, and the child's small body had been fighting for 6 days and was getting tired. A body gets tired. Even a young one, even one with everything the Sovereignty's medical resources can offer. At some point, the effort of sustaining the fight becomes its own problem. I have seen it in humans, and I have seen it in heir patients, and I had seen it enough times in the field that I recognized the shape of the situation even through the walls and the unfamiliar terminology. I mopped the corridor, and I kept my thoughts to myself. On the morning of the second day, physician Verath came to the dispensary while I was restocking. He was looking for a specific calibration solution that our unit stocked as a standard supply, and that the court medical team had apparently not brought enough of. He was brief and professional, and did not speak to me beyond asking where the solution was stored. I showed him the shelf. He took what he needed and left. But I saw his face while he was scanning the shelf labels, in the moment when he was not composing himself for a professional exchange, and I recognized what was in it. It was the face of someone who has been trying very hard at something for a long time, and is beginning to calculate the possibility that trying harder may not be the answer. I have seen that face before. I have worn it. On the third night, Jens knocked on the frame of the supply room where I was cataloging the weekly delivery. "The East Wing," she said. Her voice was careful in a way that meant she had been considering how to say this. "Marin, they've called a full consult for midnight, all 5 physicians together. They'll be in the examination suite for at least an hour, maybe more. The child is alone in the ward room." I looked at her. "The monitoring unit is running," she said quickly. "It will alarm if her readings go critical. No one is leaving her unwatched in a technical sense, but she paused. She's been crying, not loudly, just that low, exhausted kind. For about an hour before the physicians started their meeting. I could hear it from the corridor." I set down my clipboard. "She's 7 years old," Jens said. And then, because she was a careful woman who had run this facility for 9 years and understood the weight of what she was asking, "I know it's not your assignment. I know the protocols say we don't go into occupied court patient rooms without direct request. I know there are 5 court physicians who have authority over that wing right now, and none of them asked us for anything except supplies." She looked at me steadily. "I'm telling you what I heard." I picked up a clean, folded blanket from the shelf. It was the softest one we had, a pale gray thermal blanket that we kept for the smallest patients, the ones for whom the standard weight of the regular covers was too much. I carried it down the east corridor to the door of the private ward. I paused at the door. There was nothing technically stopping me from entering. Jens ran the hospice and had not told me to stay out, and no one had posted a formal restriction on the wardroom door itself, only on the examination suite. But there was the question of the 5 court physicians 20 meters away, and the sovereign king somewhere in the building. and the considerable difference in practice between mopping a floor near a royal patient and sitting beside one. I thought about it for about 4 seconds. Then I went in. She was a small child, even for a 7-year-old, the way Verath children sometimes are at that age, slight-limbed and long-necked, with the characteristic pale blue-white skin that in illness had gone to an undertone of gray, the warmth washed out of it, and the violet eyes that in sleep were just visible as thin crescents between dark lashes. The lashes were wet. She had been crying recently enough that it still showed. She was in the hospice's standard patient cot, which was too large for her, and she had worked the monitoring leads into a tangle because she had been restless, and there was no one there to straighten them. The monitoring unit was cycling through a read. The numbers were not good. I had spent enough time near medical equipment, both in the field and in 11 years of the hospice, to read the basic pattern of a vital signs display even in an alien format, and the temperature reading was sitting in a zone that, in a human patient, would have me reaching for the emergency line. I did not know where the equivalent danger thresholds were for a Verath child, but I knew the direction of wrong, and these numbers were in it. I pulled the visitor chair to the bedside and sat down, not close enough to crowd, close enough to matter. I unfolded the gray blanket and laid it gently over the existing covers, working slowly and quietly so as not to startle. The child stirred and made a small sound, not quite waking, and settled again. Her small hands were cold. I could feel the temperature differential even from the slight distance of the chair arm. The monitoring equipment created a draft, the way it always does, cold air moving off the instrument surfaces. Court equipment or hospice equipment, it makes the same draft. I sat with her. There is a thing that happens in a sick room in the late part of the night that I have never been able to explain in medical terms, and I have stopped trying. The physicians have their protocols and their instruments, and I do not dispute any of it. It is all necessary, all of it matters. The equipment in this room was more sophisticated than anything I had worked alongside in my entire core career, and it had kept this child alive through 6 days of fever that should have broken sooner. But there is also this. A body that is ill and alone in the dark is fighting a different fight than a body that is ill and not alone. I saw it in the field 100 times. 2 casualties with the same injury, the same treatment, the same prognosis on paper, and the one who had someone beside them through the night came through more often than the one who didn't. I filed it away, that fact, and I applied it, and I never had a theory good enough to explain it to a review board, so I mostly kept it to myself and simply made sure, in every facility I worked, that no one was alone in the night who didn't have to be. I had no treatment to offer this child. I had no Verath-specific medication in my head, no procedure that the 5 court physicians had not already tried, no knowledge that their centuries of combined training did not dwarf completely. What I had was the gray blanket and the chair and 11 years of sitting with strangers in the dark, and the thing my mother had given me before either of us knew what I would use it for. I sat for a while in silence, listening to the child's breathing, the quick, too shallow rhythm of a body under sustained fever pressure, and to the monitoring unit cycling, and to the distant sounds of the hospice settling in the night. The spaceport outside the long window at the far end of the corridor. A shuttle cycling up on the apron, the low vibration of it traveling through the building's bones. Then, without deciding to in any deliberate way, I began to sing. It is not a song with a name as far as I know. My mother sang it when I was small. She was from the northern settlements, the cold latitude coastal communities where the work songs are long and slow, and built for endurance rather than celebration. The melody is simple, 3 phrases that repeat in a descending pattern, like water working its way down a gradual slope. It is the kind of melody that settles into the body after a few repetitions, the kind a person finds themselves humming hours later without knowing when it began. The words, in the old northern dialect that most people do not speak anymore, are about a fishing net being mended and the weather coming in off the sea and the fish in the deep water that do not know about the weather coming. It is not a profound lyric. It is not meant to be. It is a working song, the kind of song you sing to fill the time that the work fills and to make the time bearable. The kind of song that does not demand anything of the listener, does not tell them to be brave or to hope or to fight. It only asks them to be still for a while, which is sometimes the thing a body most needs permission to do. My mother sang it to me when I was small and ill and frightened. Later I understood it was what she had when the medicine ran out and the waiting began, which is what mothers have always had and always given, the one thing that requires no equipment and no training and no credentials. I sang it to patients in the field during the bad nights, quietly, when the pain medication had reached its ceiling, and the body had to manage the rest on its own, and the person in front of me needed to know, without being told, that someone was going to stay. I sang it in the hospice when old Desser's nights were long and the other patients lay still in their rooms, and the spaceport lights made slow patterns on the ceiling, and the darkness needed something in it that was patient and warm. I sang it now. 3 phrases descending, the net and the weather and the fish in the deep water, over and over, quiet enough that it stayed inside the room, low enough to be felt more than heard, the way the right frequency settles into the chest. I was watching the child's face and watching the monitoring unit from the corner of my eye and thinking about neither of them, or thinking about both in the same way I think about everything in the night, not with urgency, not with the sharp, focused attention that means I am frightened, but with the steady, open awareness that means I am present. The child shifted, not toward waking, away from it. The fine-drawn tension in her small face eased by a fraction, the held quality of it softening at the corners of the mouth and around the eyes. Her hands uncurled a little, the fingers loosening against the blanket. She made a very small sound, a single syllable in a language I did not speak, and I did not know if it was a word or only breath-finding shape, but I recognized its tone. I have heard that sound before, in many species, in many rooms. It is the sound of a body giving itself permission to stop bracing. I kept singing. The monitoring unit cycled through another read. The temperature held for a moment, then ticked down by a small amount, not dramatically, not the kind of drop that makes you sit up straight, but the kind of small, steady movement that means something has shifted underneath the surface. The kind of movement that, in my experience, you do not see unless it is real. The secondary cascade indicators on the display, the ones I had been watching turn in the wrong direction for 2 days, began to settle. Not quickly, not conclusively, but moving, which was different from not moving, and different was everything. I kept singing. 3 phrases descending, the net and the weather and the deep water fish. An hour passed, maybe more. The common area clock at the far end of the corridor would tell me, but I was not going to walk out to check it. I have learned to measure time by the body in front of me rather than the clock on the wall. The child's breathing had slowed, not dangerously, not the slow, shallow breath of deterioration, but the longer, deeper rhythm that means the body is moving from fighting to resting. There is a difference, and in the field the difference was often everything, and I knew it when I saw it. The temperature ticked down again. I noticed, at some point, that the room had acquired a third occupant. It was a very gradual noticing, the way you become aware of something in your peripheral vision before your eyes have formally turned to look, the way a room changes its quality when another person enters it. There was a presence in the doorway, standing very still, not the sound of a footstep or the rustle of movement, something stiller than that, the specific quality of stillness that belongs to someone who came in carefully and is trying very hard not to change anything. I did not look up immediately. I finished the phrase I was singing, let the 3 descending notes complete their shape, let the silence settle for a moment in the way the song requires, and then I looked. He was not in court robes. He was in plain dark clothing, a serviceable traveling coat, the kind of coat that says nothing about the person wearing it. that is meant to say nothing. He was standing in the doorframe the way a man stands when he does not want to change the room by being in it, one shoulder against the frame, not stepping through, not retreating. He was tall, the way mature Verath males are tall, with the wide-set violet eyes and the pale silver-white skin and the long-boned structure of the inner court lines. He had the particular trained stillness that I had always associated with the sovereignty's upper court, a stillness that does not come naturally, but is built over decades of having to be unreadable in public. But underneath that stillness was something else, something that was not trained, something raw and watchful and quietly terrified, in the way that only one thing makes a person terrified in exactly that way. He had been crying, I thought, not recently, some hours ago, but recently enough that it had left a trace, a faint redness at the inner corners of the eyes that the Verath skin tone does not conceal as effectively as he probably wished. He was looking at his daughter's face. Then he looked at me, and for a moment we were simply two people in a room where a child was sleeping, and neither of us said anything. There was nothing to say that needed to be said in that moment. The monitoring unit was telling its story, and the child was breathing her new, slower rhythm, and the gray blanket was over her hands. He could see all of that. I looked back at the monitoring unit. The temperature had dropped a further half-degree, still well within the recovery process, but moving steadily. The secondary cascade indicators were settling toward a range that, even with my limited knowledge of Verath pediatric medicine, I recognized as better than where they had been. "The physicians," I said, very quietly, keeping my voice at the same level I had been singing. Not a whisper, whispers carry farther than low speaking, and they have a different quality that waking children sometimes catch. "Do they know she's turning?" "They are still in the examination suite," he said. His voice was low and controlled, a trained voice, sovereignty accented, the long vowels of the inner court dialect. They were debating a procedure, a blood-cycling protocol that Haveth disagreed with. I did not want to interrupt. A pause. I should not have left her. "Go tell them," I said. "The fever is breaking. They'll want to know, they'll want to run their follow-up reads while the turn is fresh. They'll want the data." He didn't move. "What did you do?" he said. "Sat with her," I said. "Kept the room quiet, sang her an old song." He looked at his daughter again. She had not stirred since he entered, still in that deeper, more trusting sleep, her face smooth now, the held tension gone out of it. She looked in that moment simply like a child sleeping. And I watched the quality of his stillness change, the long court-trained composure shifting underneath, becoming for just a moment not the steadiness of a sovereign, but the stillness of a man who has been carrying a very specific fear for a long time, and has just been given a first small reason to set some of it down. He put one hand on the doorframe, and I saw the knuckles whiten briefly, and then he steadied himself, and then the steadiness was real rather than practiced. "Go tell them," I said again. "They need to know, and they'll want the timing logged, they'll want to know when the turn started, so they can compare it against whatever interventions they recorded." He straightened. He looked at me with an expression that I had some difficulty reading, not the polished assessor's look of a sovereign calculating a situation, not the formal gratitude of an official conducting a ceremonial exchange. Something more direct than either of those, something quieter and with more weight in it. "What is your name?" he said. "Marin Solvik," I said, "night staff." He nodded once, the kind of nod that places something carefully in memory. Then he went to find his physicians. I went back to my routine. The court physicians were in the ward within 4 minutes, all 5 of them, moving with the controlled urgency of people who have been given an unexpected piece of good news and need to verify it before they allow themselves to believe it. They ran their sequencing and their secondary checks, and I stepped back against the wall and stayed out of their way, which was easy because they were not looking at me. They were looking at their instruments and at the child and at each other, and there was something in the room that had not been there 2 days ago, a quality of watchful relief that is different from hope, more careful than hope, less fragile. The child slept through all of it. The fever came down in increments over the next 3 hours, the slow, reliable descent that means the body has turned a corner rather than the sharp temporary dip that fools you. I have seen both. I know the difference by the steadiness of the intervals, the way each drop holds before the next one comes, the monitoring numbers moving like someone descending stairs rather than falling. By the time the first pale light was starting at the long corridor window, her temperature was in the normal range. Physician Verath came out of the ward at some point in the early morning and stood in the corridor for a moment without speaking, and then he went back in, and I thought, that is a man recalibrating. I went to the linen closet and started the morning fold. The child left the hospice that afternoon, carried out in the arms of her father in her plain gray hospice blanket, the thermal one I had put over her, which I noticed and chose not to mention. She was awake, which was the best news of all. She was sitting up in the cot when they came to carry her, and she ate from a cup of soft provisions that one of the physicians had prepared, eating slowly but steadily, with the focused deliberateness of a body that has remembered it wants food. She looked around the room while she ate. When they lifted her, she looked back at the door, scanning the corridor visible through it, with an expression that I recognized from children of that age who are looking for a specific person. I was in the doorway of the dispensary when I saw it, 15 meters away. I stayed where I was. I did not want to make a thing of it, but I watched her until the convoy moved through the Port District gate, and I thought, that's a good constitution. 7 years old and 6 days of high fever, and she's eating and looking around and wanting the person who sang to her. That's a body that decided to stay. I went back to counting supply inventory. The weekly count was overdue. The next 3 days were ordinary in the way I value ordinary, full of the specific textures of work that knows its purpose. Desser's nights were better. His medication had been adjusted by the transit district physician who did our regular rounds, a small, quiet Heron woman named Physician Merritt who had been seeing him monthly for 4 years, and the adjustment was helping. He was sleeping through until the small hours, and then only needing company for an hour or so, sitting in the common area with the bone game between us and the spaceport lights moving outside. He told me about the river delta floods of his middle years, when the delta system had backed up after a season of unusual precipitation, and 3 of the great cargo routes had gone impassable for 6 weeks, and every independent captain had been rerouting through channels that required the kind of local knowledge that the automated systems could not replicate. It was the best 6 weeks of business he had ever had, he said, with the specific satisfaction of someone who had spent 30 years building exactly the kind of expertise that becomes briefly, gloriously essential when the standard systems fail. I understood that. 2 new patients came through on transit intake, a young Heron couple, both in their early 20s, who had come down with the respiratory illness that was circulating through the Port District transit terminals that season. It was not serious, not for healthy young people with good immune function, but it felt serious when you were in it, the way respiratory illnesses always do when you cannot draw a full breath without coughing. They were very young and very frightened, the way people are frightened by the first real illness of their adult lives, when they have not yet accumulated enough experience to know the difference between sick and dying. I explained to them that what they were experiencing was survivable, that it would resolve in a week with rest and the standard support treatments, and that the coughing was the body doing exactly what it was supposed to do and not an emergency. I explained this 3 times over 2 days, in different words each time, until they believed it. That is most of what the hospice is, in the end, explaining to frightened people that what they are feeling is survivable, and sitting with them until they can feel that truth in their own bones rather than just hear it from someone else. The information is the easy part. The sitting is the work. On the 4th day after the air designate left the hospice, there was a car in the exterior bay that I did not recognize. I recognized the livery of the Sovereignty Court when I looked more closely, the blue-gray paneling and the emblem at the door. I went in the side entrance and found Yen's at the desk with the particular expression she gets when something has arrived that is outside her operational parameters, and she is being extremely professional about it. "There are 2 court officials in the conference room," she said. "They asked for you specifically, by name." I hung up my jacket on the peg by the side entrance and straightened my work vest. "All right," I said. "Marin," she said. There was something she wanted to say and was not saying. "I know," I said. "I'll be careful." The conference room is the hospice's term for a repurposed storage room that has a table and 4 chairs, and a window that looks into the inner courtyard where the supply deliveries come in. It serves as our staff meeting space, our family consultation room, and occasionally the room where we have difficult conversations with patients who need privacy. It is not impressive. The chairs are functional, and the table is old, and the window looks at a loading bay. The 2 court officials standing in it, in their blue-gray silk robes with the 4-word titles at the collar, were somewhat overdressed for the space. They presented a document, very formally, standing, with both hands, with a slight formal inclination of the head that is the Sovereignty Court's standard gesture for offering something to a person of lower rank who has performed a service. It was a letter of commendation from the office of the Sovereign King, thanking Marin Solvik, hospice night staff, for services rendered in the care of the heir designate Sovi, and conveying the sovereign's personal gratitude in language that was warm for an official document and careful in the way official documents are careful about precisely what they say and precisely what they do not. I thanked them for it. Then they presented the second document. This one was longer, more formal in its layout, with the full Sovereignty Court seal at the head and the sovereign's personal sigil at the bottom. The taller official read it aloud, and then handed it to me, and I read it myself because I believe in reading things with my own eyes. It was a formal court appointment, the post of senior healing attendant to the royal house, a position that the taller official noted, with careful precision, had to his knowledge never previously been offered to a non-Verath citizen. It came with a stipend I will not describe in detail, because the number was large enough to be embarrassing in the context of what I had actually done. It came with a suite in the palace residential complex, on the inner court level, with the light calibration panels and the view of the palace gardens. It came with a court title, attending sovereign's healer, which would be used on all formal occasions. It came with full access to the palace infirmary, including the advanced equipment and the library of Verath medical records going back 4 centuries. It came with the sovereign's direct personal patronage, which the shorter official explained means something specific in the Sovereignty Court. It means the sovereign has formally placed himself between you and anyone who might otherwise dismiss or overlook you. I read it through twice, taking my time. The officials waited. They were very good at waiting. They had the kind of professional patience that comes from years of delivering significant documents to people who need time to process them. "This is very generous," I said. "The sovereign wished me to convey," the taller official said, "that the appointment is entirely at your discretion. There is no obligation of any kind. He was specific about that. I was to say it directly, not merely include it in the document." "I appreciate that," I said. "Please tell me, is the heir designate well?" "She is fully recovered, as of 3 days ago," the taller official said, and for just a moment his composed professional expression moved slightly, the way the face of a person moves when they have been worried about something for a long time and the worry has resolved. "Fully herself. The physicians have cleared her, with no lasting indicators." "Good," I said. I folded the document along its original creases and set it on the table. "Please convey my genuine gratitude to the sovereign," I said, "and please tell him that the girl has a good constitution and a strong will, and that the fever breaking was as much her work as mine. She fought hard for 6 days before I sat with her. I want that credited properly." The taller official looked at me carefully, with the focused attention of someone recalibrating what they had expected this conversation to be. "You are declining the appointment." "I am," I said. The silence in the conference room was the particular silence of two people who had expected one kind of conversation and found another. I did not fill it with explanation. They were not owed an explanation, and an explanation would have implied the decision was more complicated than it was. "Is there anything you would have us convey?" the taller official said after a moment. He asked it without pressure, which I appreciated. I thought about it. "Tell him that the hospice needs a new heat exchange unit on the East Corridor," I said. "The current one has been cycling poorly for 2 years, and the repair requisitions keep getting deprioritized because we're a low-priority facility. In the winter it gets cold down that wing. The patients feel it." The official looked at me with an expression that, on a less composed face, would have been something between surprise and something warmer than surprise. Then he took out a small recording tablet. "The East Corridor Heat Exchange Unit," he said precisely. "Cycling poorly 2 years. Repair requisitions deprioritized." "That's it," I said. They left. I heard the car move out of the exterior bay. I stood at the conference room window for a moment, looking at the loading bay and the stacked supply crates and the ordinary afternoon light of the transit district. And then I went back to work because there were linens in room 7 that needed changing, and Desser would want his evening meal brought at 5. I heard later, by way of Jens, who had heard from the port district administrator, who had heard from someone in the court supply office, that a new heat exchange unit was installed in the East Corridor of the transit hospice within the week. Full system replacement, current model, under a 10-year maintenance contract. It arrived without ceremony or official communication, on a supply convoy that was logged as routine infrastructure upgrade. No paperwork connecting it to any court office. No document with any name attached. I noticed it when the corridor stopped being cold. That was better than a title. I mean that seriously. Old Desser's room was on the East Corridor, and so was room 7, and so was the linen closet. And in the cold season, the previous unit had been failing badly enough that I had taken to bringing an extra blanket for the linen shelf because the cleaning compound congealed slightly in the cold and became difficult to work with. The new unit ran smooth and quiet. The corridor stayed warm. A small and specific thing, and the right one. 2 weeks after that, on a quiet afternoon when the hospice was running at half capacity, and I had finished the East Wing linen change early, and started the slow final pass of the common area before the evening patients settled in, I became aware that I was not alone. He was sitting in one of the common area chairs by the long window in the same plain dark coat, watching the spaceport lights move across the transit district in the afternoon haze. He had come in through the side entrance. I found out later from Jens, who had seen him come through and had made a decision I respect her for, which was to leave it alone and not announce him. He was not surrounded by a protocol party. There was, as far as I could tell, no one with him at all. He was sitting with his hands loose on the arms of the chair, watching the window, in the way of a person who has given himself permission for 1 hour to be somewhere that makes no demands. I finished the pass I was on before I acknowledged him, because the floor was wet and leaving it half done would be sloppy, and besides I do not interrupt my work for anyone, which is a rule I have held for 11 years and do not intend to change on account of rank. Then I put the mop in the bucket and stood at a comfortable distance. "The heat exchanger works," I said. "I thought it might," he said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite dry humor but was adjacent to it, the tone of a man who has arranged something and knows it worked but is not going to make a point of it. "She's still refusing the formal shoes," he said after a moment. He was still looking at the window. "Sovi, her tutors have submitted 3 separate reports about it in the last 2 weeks. She says the heels are an inefficiency and she intends to take it up with the court protocol office directly. A pause, and the something adjacent to humor became more pronounced. She has drafted a petition, with citations. She is 7 years old. I sat down in the chair across from him, because we were both going to be here for a moment, and I did not see the point in standing. She asked me, he said, whether the woman who sang was coming back to the hospice or whether she had gone somewhere else. I told her I didn't know. She told me I should find out. That sounds like someone who knows how to assign tasks, I said. She has always known that, he said. He said it the way fathers say things about their children, with the particular combination of exasperation and pride that is one of the better things a person can feel. He looked at me then, turning from the window, and I was struck again by the quality of his attention, the way he looked at things directly, without the mediated assessment of the official gaze. He had the trained stillness and the composed face, but when he looked at you with his actual attention, it was different from the court official look, more like the look of someone who is simply trying to see clearly. I wanted to come myself, he said. Not send officials, not send another document. Come and say it to you myself. You've said it, I said, that night in the doorway. I have, he said. I know. He looked back at the window. I am not in the habit of having things I don't know how to account for. It is a professional liability in my position. Everything is required to have a protocol, a precedent, a category. He paused. You don't fit any of them. I've noticed that tends to be true, I said. The court physicians submitted their case report, he said. All 5 of them. Verath drafted it and they all signed it. It attributes the turn in the air designates fever to the sustained vocal acoustic stimulus in combination with the proximity thermal effect and the parasympathetic nervous system response to close human presence. He looked back at me. Verath wanted me to know he believes that's accurate as far as it goes. He also wanted me to know he thinks it doesn't go far enough. I didn't say anything to that. He said you sat with her because she was alone and crying, he said. Not because anyone asked you to, not because it was your assignment. He seemed to feel that distinction mattered. It did matter, I said. That's why I did it. He nodded. He was quiet for a moment, looking at his hands. They were the hands of someone who has spent his life in administrative and ceremonial functions, careful hands, unmarked. Not a worker's hands. Not worse for that, just different. She would have died, he said. Not as a question, not seeking confirmation. As a fact that a man has been carrying for 2 weeks and needs to say aloud, in plain language, without the sovereign's measured framing around it, in a room where it is simply true and does not have to be managed. She might have, I said. I was not going to comfort him with a version of events that wasn't honest. He was not a man who needed to be protected from honesty, and comforting dishonesty is its own form of disrespect. He nodded again, receiving the honesty the way a person receives something they already knew but needed confirmed. Then I owe you a debt that no document captures, he said. No, I said, you don't. He looked at me. I sat with a sick child and sang her an old song, I said. I did what I would have done for any patient in that room on any night. The debt is settled the moment she woke up, and it was settled by her own body deciding to stay. A 7-year-old with 6 days of fever. She did her part. I helped her find the quiet to do it in. I looked at him directly. That's all it was. He was quiet for a long moment. Is that what you tell yourself? He said, not unkindly, with genuine curiosity. It's what I believe, I said. I have sat beside a lot of people in the night. Some of them made it and some of them didn't, and the ones who made it weren't the ones I sat with harder or the ones I cared about more. You do what you can with what you have, and then you let the body do its part. Sophie did her part. I provided the conditions. There's a difference. He looked at me for a moment. You were a field medic, he said. The Frontier Relief Corps. I was quiet for a moment, Yes. The Heron campaign, he said. I said nothing. I had you looked into, he said simply. After that night, I needed to understand who had he stopped. The review board's decision was wrong. I know, I said. Would you like me to? No, I said. Thank you. It was a long time ago and it is not a door I need opened again. I made peace with how it went. The work I did then and the work I do now are the same work, just with better floors. I have what I need here. He took that in. Something in him settled, the long-held readiness for an argument that was not going to happen, the prepared response to a grievance that turned out not to exist. He had come ready to give something back, and found that the debt had already been settled on other terms, and he was recalibrating. Sophie asked me something else, he said after a moment. She asked me to describe the woman who sang. I told her. He paused. She said you smelled like clean sheets. She said it was the right smell for singing. I thought about that. 11 years of linens and the old-growth cleaning compound, and the slight warmth of the heating coils in the linen closet. I supposed that was right. She's going to be a handful, I said. The petition about the shoes, the task assigning, you're going to have your hands full. I know, he said, and the thing that was adjacent to dry humor became, briefly, something warmer than that. We stayed like that for a moment more, him in the chair with the spaceport lights behind him, me across the table, the common area quiet around us. The evening shift would start bringing patients through in less than an hour. Desser would want his bone game tonight. He had mentioned it at breakfast, and his nights had been harder the last few days since the pressure shifted on the weather system. I had a linen delivery to sort before then. I should get back to work, I said. He stood. A sovereign does not stand for a floor washer, but he stood, without ceremony or announcement, the way a man stands at the end of a conversation that mattered. He looked around the common area, the worn chairs, the long window with the spaceport lights, the supply corridor door, the faint smell of cleaning compound that Sophie apparently recognized. It is a good place, he said. He said it simply without condescension. He meant it. Yes, I said, it is. Marin Solvik, he said. Yes. Thank you, he said. 2 words. Not the official gratitude of the court document, and not the elaborate formality of the 2 officials in the conference room. 2 words from a man who had spent 2 weeks carrying the weight of his daughter's near death, and had come himself to say thank you to the person who had sat beside her, and they landed the way those words land when they are carrying their full meaning, undiluted by ceremony. I nodded. Take care of her, I said. She's going to fight that shoe protocol until she wins, and she probably should. He was already at the side entrance, and I saw something cross his face that might, in different company, have been an actual laugh. Then he was gone, and the common area was quiet, and the spaceport lights moved in their slow afternoon patterns across the ceiling, and I went back to the mop. Old Desser beat me at the bone game 3 times that night, which is unusual. Normally we split it fairly evenly, which is how I know we are both trying. He was in a good mood, the low-pain, easy mood that the adjusted medication had been giving him on the better nights, and he told me a story about a river crossing in the Heron Delta that took 40 minutes and involved a crate of live shellfish and a border official with an unreasonable fear of standing water. I laughed in the right places because they were the right places, and the story was genuinely funny. The night was quiet and warm, the east corridor holding its heat the way it was supposed to now. At some point, in the small hours after Desser had gone back to his room, and I was doing the last corridor pass before my shift ended, I thought about the court document folded on the conference room table. The suite in the palace residential complex, the light calibration panels, the view of the palace gardens, the 4th century medical library, the title, Attending Sovereign's Healer. I thought about it the way you think about a road you once considered taking, with genuine respect for where it goes, and then I set it down. I am not built for marble floors. My knee would complain inside a week, and besides, someone else should have that post, someone who trained for it, who knows the Verath pharmacology at depth, who can do the work that needs doing in the palace infirmary with the full weight of their expertise. There is a physician somewhere who deserves that appointment and would use it fully. It was not mine. I have mopped the same stretch of corridor for 11 years. 140 paces, and every seam in the floor plating. The linen closet that smells of the old-growth compound and the slight metallic warmth of the heating coils. The long window at the end with the spaceport lights. Desser in his room on the east corridor, telling his stories at whatever hour the night requires. The young frightened heron couple who needed the information explained 3 times before it settled. Physician Merritt, making her quiet monthly rounds and knowing her patients by name. I know this work. I know what it is and what it does, and I know, in the specific way that you know things you have tested against the actual texture of the world and found to be true, that the doing of it matters. In the morning, I will change the linens in rooms 3 and 7 and restock the dispensary shelf that we cleared last week. I will check in on Desser and see how his night ended and whether the medication adjustment is still holding. I will mop the front corridor and the supply rooms, and at some point in the late morning, the young heron couple will probably be cleared for discharge, and I will go over their follow-up instructions with them one more time, because the first day home is harder than the last day in the hospice, and they should know what to watch for. And if anyone is alone in the night and needs a song, I have the one my mother taught me. 3 phrases descending. The net and the weather and the fish in the deep water that do not know about the weather coming, and find that bearable. It is not a heroic thing. It was never meant to be. It is just the thing I have and the thing I know how to give, and in my experience that is almost always enough. The spaceport lights move. The corridor is clean and warm. Somewhere in the inner city, in the palace that I have never seen and do not particularly need to, a 7-year-old girl is drafting a petition about shoes with citations, and her father is, I imagine, reading it with the specific expression of a man trying to be stern and finding it difficult. I find that enough. I find that more than enough. I go back to work.